Well, today I'm with Dianna Steinbach. She's a Vice President of International Services with ISSA, one of my colleagues. Welcome, Dianna. I believe you're over in Germany.
Yes, I am, near
So,
Frankfurt.
yeah, your day starts much earlier than our day here in the States.
It does.
Yeah. Well, it's good to have you on Straight Talk. And what we want to talk about today is how ISSA is a worldwide organization. Often, uh, we might think of it as more of a US-based organization with more members in the US than worldwide, but worldwide is significant, and you represent that segment. Tell us what's going on in the world of ISSA around the world.
Sure. So, we've been working in multiple parts of the world before today, in Asia, Oceania, Europe, Middle East, Africa. And of course, this year we have been doing quite a bit with the pandemic, starting in January when our Chinese team and our Biorisk Advisory Council first identified that there was an outbreak happening in Wuhan. And so we've really been going flat out since then as it's moved around the world.
We often think about how cleaning is a way to fight the pandemic. How is the view of cleaning accepted around the world with our member companies and others?
It's really been interesting during the pandemic, especially because prior to the pandemic, we were dealing with the same thing that you would deal with in most countries, trying to really convince facility decision makers that cleaning did have a bottom line value, and it was having various rates of take up. A lot of parts of the world, you have the same story of facility decision makers trying to ask for more for less, or reducing their budgets, trying to trim some of the services because they really didn't see as much of a value. And then there were some pockets of people who were really interested in how it could impact the indoor environment, how it supported some of their sustainability programs or initiatives within their business. And then once the pandemic hit, it turned into a different sort of beast. Some parts of the world really took to cleaning and disinfecting as a way for them to respond. But then it's interesting, some other parts of the world where government interventions really had a pretty significant success rate. I would say some of those countries, such as Germany, where I'm based, the people there actually have not seen cleaning as a major part of the controls for COVID-19, because the government controls they felt were what really were lowering their rates. So some of our members in Germany are very frustrated right now because they're having a hard time convincing people that cleaning and disinfecting are an important part of their overall strategy. Whereas you look at the Middle East and Asia, and they were trying to disinfect anything that moved or didn't move, sometimes to a point where it was actually inappropriate actions. And we had to put out advisements to help them understand what they should or shouldn't do and how they should accomplish it.
You know, here in the States, when it comes to, besides cleaning, wearing masks in facilities, and our cleaning professionals are wearing masks, but we're seeing a lot of folks not wearing them. And I read a news report yesterday about Hong Kong, how it had a significantly less number of cases, and it's much closer to Wuhan. And it's because everyone is, I think the article mentioned mask frenzy. They love their masks. Are you seeing that around the world, that there's better use of masks than in the US?
I think there are plenty of countries where that is more consistent. One of the things that I often have to explain to people is that when you look at someplace like America or Canada or just North America in general, the size of it and the number of states can be compared to the entire continent of Europe, where each country is maybe the size of a state in America. And so it's much easier for a country that's smaller in size to have better success rates with some of their restrictions or rules than a country is large, where a single state may have their own rules, and that may differ greatly from others. And when you talk with people in the industrial hygiene world, they talk about the hierarchy of controls. And ironically, PPE is the bottom of the funnel. And that's because they look at trying to remove the virus or the risk initially, or substitute it by doing stay-at-home methods. Things like engineered controls, putting in plexiglass, which you see in a lot of public places, line management or control of numbers. Cleaning comes after those as an administrative control. And that's where you're filtering how many layers can I filter to reduce the risk that the virus even comes in contact with people. And then PPE is the final, essentially like the final protection. And you know, in some countries where the people are more used to rule following, they don't question it as much, then it's been a little more consistent. People will wear it till they're told they don't have to. They just move on with life because to them, it's a small price to pay for what they can get out of starting up their businesses again. But again, they have a smaller population, so it's easier to maintain that control than a much larger country where you have a lot of variety.
It's really cool to hear what's going on around the world and the different approach to some of these things for sure. Dianna, tell us about the response of everyone around the world that you know of.
Sure. So one of the things that you'll notice is that really for about the first month, it was pretty isolated in China. And you didn't see as much spread in Asia because Asian countries were already prepared after the last SARS outbreak in 2003, 2004. In fact, South Korea had just run a national government level scenario in late 2019 about what would happen if a virus like this were to come to South Korea from China. So some of those countries were already prepared and were able to really put things in place quickly. Whereas other countries where people were spreading to, like Europe and other places, really weren't thinking that this is something that they would need to be prepared for as much. And really, so like an entire month went by before you started to see upticks in France, Italy, Iran, but still the rest of the world seemed to think like this is still going to be limited. And then within a week or two of those spikes really happening in late February, all of a sudden March started to explode in multiple parts of the world. And while countries were trying to restrict travel, then they started seeing everything happening within their countries. And there were still parts of the world where travel was not restricted. So then you saw those start to increase in like Latin and South America and in Africa, but they stayed isolated. And then you saw North America really start to come about a month after Europe. And then from there, the last group has really been South America and Latin America, which has really spiked most recently. And we still are waiting to see what's going to happen in the Southern Hemisphere because they're going into winter right now. And so that means people are going to be indoors more, closer together. Cold and flu season will be kicking in for them. So those countries are trying to figure out the things that they put in place that kept them milder than some of these other countries in the Northern Hemisphere. Will that help them, or will they have a more emphasized spike than, say, what some of the Northern Hemisphere countries, like in Asia, has started to see recently as they've opened back up? So it'll really be interesting to see how not only we saw it progress across the world, but what will progress in this next phase as different countries are working into different scenarios.
Thank you, Dianna. That's interesting. Now, in the US, we've started to reopen states, and now they're backing up. They're seeing issues with the spikes that you talked about. And so a bit of a reversal with reopening here. What's going on with reopening around the world? Are there any specific countries or examples you'd like to cite?
Sure. I think one of the things that we're seeing is, especially in Europe, as they were preparing to reopen, they were looking a lot more at the cleaning and disinfecting tactics, whereas Asia started to reopen first and then started looking at cleaning and disinfecting after they saw their second waves, or they thought they had it handled, and when they realized they didn't want to shut down their economies again, so they were trying to figure out what controls like cleaning can we use to keep the businesses open but reduce our risk. Now, one of the things that we've come across has been an interesting reaction from many seasoned cleaning executives and managers around the world who are coming to us with very basic questions. And part of that is because a lot of them were used to basic commercial cleaning, or they were doing restoration work, not necessarily infection control work. And then suddenly they're being asked to implement these disinfecting methods or different types of focus that they weren't used to using very much. So they were very qualified, but they were trying to figure out exactly how should I do this so I get it right. And then you were seeing conflicting advice. If you look up government guidance in many countries around the world, or just search infection control online in those countries, regardless of where they were, most of the advice came from the healthcare industry. And the healthcare industry is looking at a much more severe, I guess, need to disinfect or sterilize. And they're looking at what do you do when you have known cases, multiple known cases in your hospital or your clinic, whereas most of the facilities world is not in a healthcare environment. So they're seeing these stricter measures and guidance points, but they're trying to figure out how do they work them into a commercial environment. And then you layer on top of those questions, what kind of technology is coming at them? So there's been a lot of people pushing extreme technologies or techniques that are reserved for acute decontamination efforts when you do have an outbreak on a cruise ship, or you do have a healthcare environment that's trying to minimize risk around a containment unit. And that's not the normal facility world. So people were trying to figure out, in between their government guidances and a lot of stuff coming more from infection control and healthcare, really, how do I make this applicable? And many were saying, you know, I have customers asking me for all kinds of crazy stuff. And I'm trying to say, we really don't need to go that far. Basic cleaning with increased frequencies and some well-placed disinfecting may be all we need. But one guy was saying, my customer said, I need you to make it smell better. So you've done all these things, but I can't smell anything. My people need to smell something. And he's trying to explain you don't have to layer on, you know, deodorizer. It's not necessary. And so what we did is we created a position paper about what we call confidence cleaning. That's out now on ISSA's coronavirus page. And basically that helps professionals in our industry try to reinforce their expert advice on having a calm and rational approach to the cleaning. So that customers can see you don't need to go to extremes. You really need to use the basics a little more often and a little more focused, and then just communicate it better. Because communicating how you're cleaning is much better than what we call cleaning theater, which is doing all this whiz-bang stuff in front of people, which might actually be dangerous, because that technique might be something that you're not supposed to do in an occupied space, just so that people can see that you're doing something. So we've really been advocating for kind of stick to your guns. If you feel that there's a more rational approach, don't feel like you're being pulled to have to do something additional, because in the end, the customers are going to remember who really kept it calm and steady versus who kind of jumped onto the bandwagon of the day, and possibly unnecessarily.
So people are people, aren't they? It's all about how it smells.
Yeah,
If it smells
it comes
clean, it
down
must
to,
be clean, but we know that's not always the case.
yeah.
Yeah. Great information, Dianna. You know, I've been to Germany a couple times and I'd love to come see you, but that's going to be a while. I hope you're
Yeah,
not,
I understand. Yeah,
I
not
hope
a
you're not
problem.
stuck.
We'll hold a seat for you at a beer garden.
Yeah, we'll do that. Well, thanks for the update from our worldwide group, and we'll do another one another time. Talk to you later.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Take care.